I mean, you can't make those stories up.
You can tell it very well.
Okay.
That makes a great deal of difference. Number five. And this is a couple, and I'm not sure who's going to be here, but quite often they're one and the same anyway. Dick and Ellen Clattenburg. A couple of years ago, Cookie and I arrived at their home for a meeting. Before the meeting could start, we had to hold up traffic while the Clattenburg cows crossed the Katy Hill Road to a new pasture. Ellen was the coordinator for the huge celebration of the town's 250th anniversary. She has served on a number of organizations and is presently the curator for the Historical Society. School volunteer for ELF also. Dick is a pediatrician, counselor. Presently he's a select board member. He's known for his excellent listening skills and common sense approach to any problem. So I don't know which one's coming up or whether they're both coming up, but the Clattenburgs.
We're both coming up. Ellen has the visual. She's going to kick me when I forget to say something. So, Ginger mentioned what it was like to first move here, and next week it will be our 35th anniversary of moving here.
Wow.
And I think our memories are extremely vivid of that time. We had moved, we were living in Seattle, to which we had fled. It was about as far away as we could get from our backgrounds in Philadelphia and Baltimore. And don't get me wrong, there were wonderful people in Philadelphia and Baltimore, but there were certain aspects that we were ready to shed and go to the West Coast. So we looked at various places and decided to buy this place where we live now in Vermont, which we did by phone. No idea where the boundaries were, etc. And we wrote for a town history, because somebody had slipped us a Weathersfield Weekly or something. Edith had slipped us a... Somebody...
Yes, from the land transaction.
Edith was on top of the land transactions.
She told us we had to
Subscribe
to the weekly.
Right. at the out-of-state
Which
rate,
of
I
course
believe.
we did.
Yes. And so we wrote for a John Hurd history, which I'm sure you've all read, and a 2-volume history of the town of Weathersfield. And we got the books in the mail when we were in Seattle, but we also got this letter from this gentleman. And the letter was signed Parker Risley. He said, I live in Weathersfield. Are you the Richard Clattenburg whose father and uncle and aunt, et cetera, everything I'd gotten away from, I went to school with and grew up with in Philadelphia. I can't wait to meet you. So we pulled into our house in the first or second week of August, and it was very lonely there, because of course we didn't know a soul. We had invited up to Edith's briefly on about day 3. We thought we were coming up for drinks, but we were really coming up for political identification. And we did not know enough yet to just say reflexively to Edith, we're Democrats. Because whatever we said, we didn't get drinks, or Anyway, so we were feeling lonely, and every time we shut the door in our house, the paint would sort of fall off onto the floor, and we had a party line, so it would keep ringing, but it was always for the Hennessy's. But one day, this golden-colored old VW pulled up the driveway, and out got Parker. And we met him, and he, like so many people we've met here in town, was a tremendous help to us in many, many aspects. I'm going to hand this to you now.
Okay. So Parker was born in 1909 and had grown up in Philadelphia. He had served in World War II in the Army Air Corps. He was stationed in Burma and India. After the war, he actually went back to Baltimore, where he married Eloise, and said, I've always wanted to live in India, let's go to India. So they went to India, but it was in 1948, at the height of the independence movement, Eloise was appalled by how they were treated because, of course, they're Anglos and they look like, you know, British colonialists, and they had many problems. And so instead of living in India, they moved to Perkinsville. And they bought a farm down in what is now the flood control area. They bought it from Dave Claghorn and started raising goats. So this is the farm that if you're driving across the Stoughton Pond Dam, it's immediately below and to the, whatever, this side of the dam. And Parker used his Jeep and ground-driven equipment to do the mowing, and he had to shave the back of his goats who were always getting out from his electric fence. In 1953, he had a heart attack and had to stop farming. So he ended up renting a house and then becoming postmaster in Perkinsville. And in those days, you had to have the post office in your house. So he and Eloise bought the house right next to the Perkinsville General Store. And that's where the post office was. And Dottie Richardson was his first clerk. Parker retired in about 1973 from the post office and lived in Weathersfield. He was devoted. He was one of the founding members of the Historical Society. And what he loved was Weathersfield, Perkinsville, his dogs, his little dachshunds, Max and Chris. He loved his garden, which was like an oasis behind his house, very, very quiet. He loved to play bridge. He always loved goats, even though he didn't have them. And this is a portrait of Parker painted by someone he was in the Army with in about 1947 or so. So at any rate, at his auction, we bought it.
So Parker would always fill us with wisdom, and he had many ideas, and he took death very seriously. And he was quite convinced that he would return, and not as a snake or something, but he would somehow return. And he was convinced he'd live up in the clouds somewhere. And he was always puzzled at what the men were going to do who had lost a spouse and then remarried when they got up there and had both the spouses there. He read that issue. And he didn't do that, and I think he was grateful. But he, as part of that, he made quite a study of where he was going to be buried. And he went up to the Plain Cemetery, and he made it clear to us that he was going up there to first find a plot where he would be, where he liked the neighbors. And the second was he wanted to have a good view of Mount Ascutney, because that's where apparently he was going to be for some time. And so he went up there, and I won't divulge the names of the neighborhood he chose, but he carefully chose his neighborhood, and he found certain options, and he lay down in each option different ways to see which option would give him, which plot would give him the best view of Mount Ascutney. Well, one of the reasons he told us this story was while he was doing this, the cemetery commission just happened at that time to be doing their rounds or whatever they do up there to make sure everything's as beautiful as it always is. And they came upon Parker lying on the ground, sort of looking at Mount Ascutney. But when we were thinking about these wonderful things that this story and other wonderful things he told us, we realized that when he said to us that he would come back in some way, that our telling you all about this tonight is one way sort of Parker's come back to this community. Thank you very much.